I walked into Hargrove Medical Center's grand conference room. I was wearing the same white coat I'd worn for 7 years. It still had a small ink stain near the left pocket. I'd tried to wash it out twice. Given up after that. Some stains stay. I remember pausing at the door just for a second, not because I was nervous, because I recognized the voice coming from inside. Low, unhurried, the kind of voice that had learned long ago it never needed to rush because rooms rearranged themselves around it. I'd heard that voice exactly once before, 4 years earlier, in a hallway that smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee, when it had said something that I'd carried in my chest like a splinter ever since. I smiled before I even opened the door. My name is Cassidy Wren. I'm 31 years old. I'm a cardiothoracic surgeon at a hospital in Boston, and this is not the story I thought my life would be. When I was 24, I was finishing my 3rd year of medical school at Northwestern, and I was good. I knew I was good. Not in an arrogant way, more in the way you know the ground is solid beneath your feet. My attendings knew it. My fellow residents knew it. I had hands that didn't shake and a mind that stayed quiet under pressure. And in surgery, that combination is worth more than almost anything else. But being good doesn't protect you from everything. My mother got sick that winter. Congestive heart failure, diagnosed in November, deteriorating fast by January. She was 56 years old, and she had worked as a school librarian for 30 years, and she had never once complained about anything in her life. And suddenly she was in a hospital bed in Evanston looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. I took a leave of absence. Just 1 semester. That's what I told myself. That's what I told the program director. Just enough time to get her stable, to get her into a good facility, to make sure she had what she needed. What she needed turned out to be a lot more than 1 semester. I came back 8 months later. 8 months is a lifetime in medical school, in terms of progress and perception. The cohort I'd started with had moved ahead. I was placed with a group a year younger than me, which, rationally, I understood it, procedurally it made sense. But it still felt like arriving at a party after everyone had already found their people. I caught up fast. That's what I do. But catching up and belonging are different things, and the attending who oversaw my surgical rotations that 2nd year made sure I understood the distinction. His name was Dr. Whitmore, chief of cardiothoracic surgery, about 60 years old, the kind of man who had probably been imposing at 30 and had only calcified further since. He had a particular way of looking at younger residents, a slow, assessing look, like he was trying to find where the structural weakness was. With most of the men in my cohort, he found it eventually and filed it away. With me, I think he decided before he looked. He never said anything overtly hostile. That's what made it hard to name. He would ask questions during rounds that he didn't ask the others. He would interrupt my presentations with small corrections that were technically accurate but unnecessary, the kind of thing you do when you want someone to feel perpetually 1 step behind. During one procedure, when I sutured a particularly difficult closure and the senior resident said quietly, "That was clean," Whitmore looked up and said, "We'll see. We'll see." I sutured it. It held. It healed. There was nothing to see. But that phrase stayed with me. We'll see. It was the verbal equivalent of a hand on your shoulder keeping you from moving forward. The worst moment came in February of my 2nd year back. There was a case. A 53-year-old man with a rare mitral valve defect. Complicated presentation. 2 previous surgeons had declined to operate. I'd reviewed his file 3 times. I'd mapped out the approach in my head at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday while my mother slept down the hall in her apartment and the city was completely quiet. I went to Whitmore with a proposal. A detailed one. He listened. He let me finish. Then he looked at me the way you look at something that has amused you without meaning to. "You've been back in rotation for what, 6 months?" 8, I said. "And you're proposing to lead on a case that Dr. Garfield passed on. I've identified a modified approach that addresses the unsure you have." He closed the folder. "You're eager, Cassidy. That's not a bad thing." "But eagerness isn't judgment." He paused. "Focus on the fundamentals for now. You'll get your cases." He gave the case to a 3rd-year resident named Phillips, a good surgeon, not better than me. The case went well. I was glad for the patient, genuinely, but Phillips used a version of the approach I had outlined because Whitmore had apparently mentioned it to him as a suggestion. I found that out 2 weeks later by accident, from a nurse who didn't realize I'd been in the room when the original meeting happened. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound like exactly what he wanted me to sound like. Young, reactive, difficult. I just remembered it. I have a very good memory. I finished my residency. I did my fellowship at Mass General. I specialized in complex valve reconstruction and minimally invasive cardiac repair, and I built a reputation the only way that actually works. Case by case, outcome by outcome, until the record speaks before you enter the room. My mother died the spring I turned 28, 3 years after that first diagnosis, longer than the doctors initially projected, because I had researched every option and advocated through every setback and driven her to every appointment and sat with her through every hard night. She died in April, when the trees along her street were just starting to come in, and she had told me the week before that she was proud of me. I still can't talk about that without stopping for a minute, so I won't. What I'll say is, after she was gone, I went back to work, and I went back hard, and within 2 years I had a position at Hargrove Medical Center in Boston, which is one of the best cardiac surgery programs in the country. I was the youngest attending in the department. I had published 3 papers. I had a waiting list. I had also, in that time, become the surgeon who'd been called in on 2 cases that other hospitals had declined. Cases that were considered too complex, too risky, odds too long. I'd taken both. Both patients were alive. One of them was a public figure, a city councilwoman in her 40s who'd had a catastrophic aortic dissection during a campaign event. The case made local news, then national. Not because of me, because of her, because she recovered and returned to work in 4 months and stood at a podium and said she was grateful to the team at Hargrove. I was part of that team. I led the reconstruction. That's all context. That's the ground beneath the feet. The conference was called the Vanguard Cardiac Symposium, annual event rotating host city. That year it was Boston, and Hargrove was co-hosting. The conference room where the opening reception was held had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the harbor, and every surgeon in that room had credentials long enough to paper a wall. I knew maybe a third of them personally. I was standing near the window with a glass of water. I don't drink at professional events, haven't since residency. That's just a rule I made for myself. When I heard him, the same voice, still unhurried, still certain, I turned slowly. Whitmore was across the room, 20 feet away, talking to 2 other men I didn't recognize. He was older. Of course he was. 4 years had passed. But he had the same bearing, the same proprietary comfort in whatever room he happened to be occupying. He hadn't seen me yet. I turned back to the window. I thought about the folder he'd closed. The modified approach that ended up attributed to someone else. The way he'd said, "We'll see," after I'd done something worth seeing. Then I thought about the councilwoman. About her standing at that podium. I finished my water. The panel session started 20 minutes later. I was on it. One of 4 surgeons presenting on advances in minimally invasive valve repair, which was directly in my specialty. The moderator introduced each of us. When she got to me, she mentioned the councilwoman's case by name because it had become something of a landmark in the field, a reference point people cited. There was a moment of acknowledgement from the room. The kind that's quiet but real. Whitmore was in the 3rd row. I saw him look up from his program when my name was announced. I saw the small recalibration happen in his face. The slight adjustment, like a man who has just realized the terrain has changed under him while he wasn't paying attention. I didn't look at him again. I gave my presentation. I'd spent 12 years making sure I never needed to make anything personal. The work was the statement. Afterward, there was a reception. He found me. That surprised me, actually. I hadn't expected that. He walked over with the same measured authority, and for a moment, I thought he might simply pretend he didn't remember me. The graceful exit, the convenient amnesia of people who've done small cruelties and would prefer they remain categorically small. But he stopped in front of me and extended his hand and said, "Cassidy, it's been a while." "It has," I said. "Impressive work," he said. "The councilwoman's case, I read your write-up in the journal." I looked at him. Not unkindly, just clearly. "I remember," he said. And something shifted in the way he said it. Something that was almost an acknowledgement without being one. The verbal equivalent of a man looking at a closed door he himself had shut, that you were always thorough. Thorough. I almost laughed. Not out of cruelty. Out of something more like recognition. That even now, even standing in front of the outcome, he found a word that kept the ceiling low. Thorough. Not brilliant, Not precise, not right when I had been right and he had been wrong. Thorough. I remember you telling me to focus on the fundamentals, I said. My voice was even. I meant it to be. I did. I have been. He looked at me for a long moment. There was something in his face I hadn't seen there before, or maybe I had and hadn't known how to read it then. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was something quieter. The look of a man who has encountered at an inconvenient moment a record he can no longer revise. You've built something real, he said finally. I nodded once, yes. Someone called his name from across the room. He glanced over, then back at me. A pause. Well, he said. Good to see you. He walked away. I watched him go. Do I forgive him? People ask versions of that question sometimes when I tell this story. Usually women ask it. Sometimes men who have been in similar rooms with similar people. They ask it like the answer determines something about me, like it's a test with a right response. Here's what I actually think. Forgiveness is something you do for yourself. Whether I'd forgiven Whitmore is between me and whatever I carry on my way to work in the morning. Some days the splinter is there. Some days I can't find it. What I know for certain is that I don't need him to acknowledge what happened. I don't need him to say I underestimated you or I was wrong or the approach you outlined was the one we used. I spent years early on wanting the recognition from the specific person who'd withheld it, like there was something in their hands that I couldn't get anywhere else. There isn't. That's the thing no one tells you when you're 24 and someone in authority is casually narrowing your world. The thing in their hands isn't yours. It was never theirs to hold. The record is the record. The patients are alive. My name is on those papers. He can call me thorough until the end of his career. 3 months after the symposium, I was asked to chair the program committee for the following year's conference. I accepted. Of course I accepted. My mother would have laughed at that, not meanly, just with that particular delight she had when things turned out to be exactly as ironic as life tends to be. She was a librarian. She believed, genuinely, that the right information always surfaces eventually, that things get read, that records matter. She wasn't wrong. I think about her a lot in the operating room. Not in a way that breaks my concentration. I don't allow that, can't afford it, wouldn't want to. But sometimes, in the middle of a difficult repair, when my hands are doing the thing they know how to do and my mind is clear and quiet and the monitor is steady, I think, this is what I came back from. The leave of absence. The lost year. The cohort that moved ahead. The folder that got closed. All of it led to here, to these hands, to this room. I still have the white coat with the ink stain. I don't wear it anymore. I have newer ones, obviously, but I haven't thrown it out. It's in the back of my closet, behind the good blazers and the winter coats. I've thought about donating it. I keep not doing it. Some stains stay. I think I've made my peace with that. The day I walked into that conference room and heard his voice, I wasn't looking for anything from him. That's what I want to be clear about. I wasn't there for that moment. I wasn't there for the look on his face when my name was announced, or the way he found the smallest possible word for what I'd done. I was there because I had earned the right to be there. Because 7 years of early mornings and second opinions and one very hard year in an apartment in Evanston had built something that didn't require his permission to stand. He knew that. That was enough. That was, honestly, more than enough. There's something I've thought about a lot since that conference room, since the moment Whitmore stood in front of me and reached for the smallest word he could find. Thorough. I've thought about why that word, specifically. And I think I understand it now in a way I couldn't have at 24. When someone has spent years believing a ceiling exists, they don't remove it just because the evidence says otherwise. They lower their vocabulary instead. They find a word that technically acknowledges what's in front of them without fully letting it in. Thorough is what you say when you can't bring yourself to say right. It's the door cracked open an inch with a foot pressed against it. I used to want him to open the door all the way. I'll be honest about that. There was a version of me, early in residency, who wanted the specific acknowledgement from the specific person who'd withheld it. Like justice had a face and that face was his. Like the record only counted if he said it counted. That version of me was wrong, not weak, wrong. There's a difference. What I've come to understand is this. The work accumulates whether or not anyone is watching. Every decision I made, to take the leave of absence for my mother, to come back, to stay even when coming back was harder than leaving, each of those decisions stacked on top of the ones before, quietly, without applause, and they built something that no one's vocabulary could diminish, not even Whitmore's. That's what cause and consequence actually looks like in real life. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with a dramatic reveal or a moment of cinematic justice. It just shows up one day in a conference room in Boston wearing the name badge of someone you used to think had the power to define your limits, and it says, "You built this while he wasn't paying attention." The part that took me the longest to learn, the part I think most people in situations like mine don't get told enough, is that integrity doesn't require an audience. I didn't take my mother's case because it would look good on a record. I didn't come back to residency because I wanted to prove something to Whitmore. I came back because surgery was what I was supposed to do, and I knew it, and that kind of knowing doesn't negotiate with other people's opinions of you. That's the difference between intelligence applied outward, to impress, to convince, to prove, and intelligence applied to the problem directly in front of you. The second kind compounds. The first kind exhausts itself. My mother was a librarian. She believed that the right information always surfaces eventually, that things get read, that records matter. She was one of the most quietly disciplined people I've ever known, and she never wasted a single moment trying to change the minds of people who had already decided. She just kept doing the next right thing, and the next, until the shape of her life made the argument for her. I try to do the same. Whitmore called me thorough. The patient the councilwoman's team called me about, the case 2 hospitals had already declined. She's alive. She stood at a podium. She went back to work. That's the record. That's what thorough looks like, measured correctly. Whatever he meant by the word, I've decided to keep it. I've decided to let it mean exactly what I know it means, which is, she didn't stop. She did the work. She was there in the room, with the right answer, every single time. That's enough. That has always been enough.